It was August 17, 1937, and Europe stood at the edge of a storm. With war clouds darkening the skies, the Royal Navy laid down the keel of a new kind of ship, one that would carry not broadsides, but wings. She was to be a fortress of steel and flight, a floating airfield designed to challenge enemies, in the sky and at sea. Her name was a declaration of intent. HMS Formidable. She was no ordinary carrier. Unlike the American flat tops with their wide open decks, Formidable was designed to take punishment. Her flight deck was armored, her hangars sat deep inside an armored box. This an innovation born from bitter lessons of past wars and the Royal Navy's need to survive in waters swarming with bombers. On August 17, 1939, she launched in dramatic style. The cradle gave way during her launch, and Formidable slid down the ways in a violent lurch, injuring spectators and alarming officials. But she didn't crack, she was tough, even in berth. Sailors joked she launched herself, an omen perhaps of the grit she'd show in battle. By November 1940, Formidable joined the fleet and was immediately sent into the heart of the war. Her first mission saw her steaming south to escort a convoy to Cape Town. Then, without pause, she crossed the Indian Ocean, through the Suez Canal, and into the burning cauldron of the Mediterranean. There, she joined Force B at Alexandria. The Mediterranean fleet had already taken a pounding, and Formidable was brought in to replace her wounded sister, HMS Illustrious. The timing was critical. German and Italian aircraft ruled the skies, and British forces were stretched thin. Every aircraft mattered. Then came Crete. On May 26, 1941, the sky over Formidable turned black with the sound of dive bombers. Junkers Ju-87 Stukas screamed down with bombs slung beneath their wings. Two struck home. One punched through the flight deck and exploded in the hangar, the other tore open the hull. Flames erupted, steel twisted, and men were thrown through the air. But Formidable did not die. Within hours, her crews fought the fires, cleared the wreckage, and restored flight operations. The ship was bruised, burned, and scarred, but still underway. Her speed dropped, but she kept moving. Her flight deck was battered, yet aircraft still launched. 12 men were killed, others bore burns, and wounds that would never fully heal. But the ship, like her name, lived up to the reputation she was only just beginning to earn. With temporary repairs, Formidable limped westward, first to Alexandria, then on across the Atlantic to the United States. At Norfolk Navy Yard, American hands and British determination brought her back to fighting strength. And when she emerged from dry dock, Formidable was not simply repaired, she was transformed. Next, she would sail for the vastness of the Indian Ocean. A new theater, a new enemy. A new storm. Her long journey from the Mediterranean through the Atlantic to Norfolk had been grueling, but her crew was eager to prove themselves once again. The war had expanded far beyond Europe. The Japanese Empire, swift and brutal, was sweeping across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Singapore had fallen, the mighty battleships Prince of Wales and Repulse had been sunk by air attack, shaking the British Empire to its core. The eastern seas were perilous, and air power would decide their fate. So Formidable joined the Royal Navy's Eastern Fleet under Admiral Sir James Somerville, operating out of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. This fleet was outnumbered and outgunned, forced to rely on cunning, speed, and the strength of its aircraft carriers to deter the advancing Japanese. In early 1942, when Japanese carrier forces approached, the Eastern Fleet scattered like shadows in the night. Formidable was at sea, her radar searching the horizon, her crew alert. The battle fleet avoided confrontation, preserving what strength it had for the moment when the tide could be turned. Though no decisive fleet engagement occurred, Formidable's presence was vital. She provided air cover for convoys, scouted relentlessly for submarines, and kept the enemy guessing. Without her, Britain's hold on the Indian Ocean might have crumbled completely. Months later, her orders changed. The Mediterranean beckoned once more. The Allies were preparing for the invasion of Italy, the soft underbelly of Axis Europe. And Formidable's aircraft would play a key role. In 1943, she joined the campaign against Italy, where war was slow and brutal. Her air group, now strengthened by the nimble Seafires, the naval variant of the famous Spitfire, and the powerful Barracudas and Avengers, flew relentless missions. During the Salerno landings, in September 1943, Formidable Seafires battled the Germans in the skies, protecting troops from deadly air attack. Meanwhile, her torpedo and dive bombers struck enemy supply lines, ports, and coastal batteries. But it was no easy task. The fragile Seafires were prone to accidents, and many pilots were lost, not to enemy fire but to the unforgiving sea and the dangers of the deck. Yet Formidable endured. Through fire and flood, air attack and storm, she stood firm, the linchpin of British naval air power. Her name, a promise made years before her launch, was being fulfilled day by day. But the war was changing again. The Allies' focus was shifting eastwards, to the vast Pacific. The United States was pressing forward, island by island, inching closer to Japan itself. The Royal Navy would join this titanic struggle, bringing with it ships like Formidable, armored, seasoned, and deadly. By the middle of 1944, Formidable was preparing for a new kind of war, the vast, brutal campaign across the Pacific Ocean. After her refit in British dockyards, she emerged upgraded with better radar, additional anti-aircraft guns, and improved flight deck facilities. Her air group was refreshed too, now including the fierce American-built Vought Corsairs and Grumman Avengers, replacing many of her aging British aircraft. In early 1945, Formidable sailed to join the newly formed British Pacific Fleet. This fleet was Britain's bold return to the Pacific stage. A force designed to stand shoulder to shoulder with the massive US Navy carrier groups that had been hammering Japan for years. The stakes could not have been higher. Japan's defenses were desperate but deadly. Kamikaze attacks, suicide missions by pilots willing to crash their planes into Allied ships, were growing more frequent and lethal. The Americans had already suffered catastrophic losses. But Formidable was built differently. She had weathered bombs, torpedoes, and dive bombers. Her armored flight deck was a fortress in the storm. By March 1945, Formidable steamed westward toward Okinawa, the last great obstacle before a full-scale invasion of the Japanese home islands. The British Pacific Fleet joined the enormous American task forces assaulting the island. Among them, for British fleet carriers, Formidable was the oldest and the toughest. Her mission was fierce and unforgiving, to suppress enemy airfields on the Sakishima Gunter Islands, small but critical bases launching raids against the Allied fleet. Day after day, wave after wave of aircraft launched from her deck. Corsairs and Avengers struck runways, fuel dumps, radar sites, and hangars, crippling the Japanese air threat and shielding the massive invasion force. But the enemy would not surrender easily. On May 4, 1945, disaster struck. A lone kamikaze broke through the heavy anti-aircraft barrage. Screaming down with its engine roaring, the Japanese pilot crashed into Formidable's flight deck just forward of the island superstructure. The explosion was violent, steel buckled, fuel ignited, debris flew. 8 men were killed, and over 50 wounded. Fires blazed, but the armored deck held. The hangar below remained intact, sparing the ship from worse catastrophe. Within hours, the crew patched the deck with steel plates, cleared wreckage, and, astonishingly, by sunset, aircraft were launching once again. The Americans watched in disbelief. Where their wooden deck carriers might have been out of action for weeks, Formidable was fighting on in hours. Her armor was more than metal, it was salvation. But kamikazes kept coming. Just 5 days later, on May 9, 1945, another kamikaze, this time a Mitsubishi Zero piloted by Yoshinari Kuros, slid through the carrier air screen and dove into her flight deck and deck park. The bomb detonated on the armored steel, gouging a 4.5-inch depression about 10 feet square. Flames erupted instantly, igniting aircraft on deck and sending burning fuel into the hangar below. One crewman, Petty Officer George Hinkins, was killed by debris, and several others wounded. Up to 18 aircraft, Corsairs and Avengers, were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Despite the carnage, damage control teams flooded the hangar, quenched the blaze, and flowed power back to the engines. Incredibly, operations resumed in just 50 minutes, allowing Formidable to continue sorties almost without interrupting her rhythm. This second hit sealed her reputation. Even under 2 kamikaze strikes in 1 week, she remained a living fortress at sea. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second detonated over Nagasaki. The shockwave rippled through the globe, heralding an end no one had truly expected. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito's voice echoed from radios across every ship in the British Pacific Fleet. Japan would surrender. The long nightmare was over. Formidable's crew received the news quietly, a mixture of relief and sorrow. Cheers erupted, hats flew skyward, but beneath the celebration lay a deep and lasting cost. Too many comrades had been lost. Too many scars were yet to heal. Though the war had ended, Formidable's journey was not yet complete. She remained in the Pacific as part of the occupation force. Her aircraft now flew reconnaissance and patrol missions, projecting Allied power in a region slowly moving from war to uneasy peace. In September 1945, Formidable returned to Sydney, Australia, her deck still marked by battle. Over nearly 100,000 miles sailed, more than 2,000 combat sorties flown, multiple bomb hits survived, and dozens of brave souls lost. The Admiralty recognized her exceptional service. Honors were awarded, and the American Navy, once doubtful of British armored carriers, acknowledged the wisdom of her design. Formidable had proven prophetic, armor saved lives. Yet the world was moving on. With the guns finally silenced and peace declared, Formidable sailed home, not as a symbol of empire, but as a survivor of the fiercest battles of the Second World War. Her armored hull had withstood Stukas, torpedoes, kamikazes, and the relentless storm of war. She had earned her battle honors, but the world was changing. Naval aviation was moving toward faster jets, angled flight decks, and new technology that would soon make her design outdated. In the months after the war, Formidable took on a new role, a final humanitarian mission. She ferried war-weary troops and airmen home to Britain and the Commonwealth. Her hangars, once filled with Corsairs and Avengers, were converted into bunks and quarters, carrying men desperate to return to civilian life. By 1947, she returned to Royal Navy control and was placed in reserve at Rosyth. The great armored carrier had survived the war, but peace would begin her slow decline. The post-war Royal Navy faced tight budgets and rapid technological changes. New carriers were being designed, sleeker, faster, and built for the jet age. Formidable, though still capable, could not keep pace. The cost of modernizing her was too high. She saw brief service in 1953, hastily recommissioned to take part in Queen Elizabeth II's Coronation Fleet Review at Spithead. Proud and polished, she stood among newer ships, but beneath the surface, time was catching up. Her later years were quiet, serving as a training ship, barracks, and for occasional aircraft trials. Her turbines aged, her systems grew obsolete. She was no longer a frontline warrior. By 1956, the decision was made. Deemed surplus, HMS Formidable was sold for scrap. In 1957, the ship that had braved bombs and kamikazes was quietly dismantled at Inverkeithing. No grand ceremony marked her end, only the steady arc of cutting torches and the fading echo of steel, surrendering to time. Yet, her legacy did not vanish. In the post-war debates over carrier design, Formidable and her illustrious class sisters stood as living proof that armor could be the difference between survival and catastrophe. British doctrine evolved. American designers took notice. Future warships carried the lesson she had earned in blood and fire. She was never the biggest or fastest, but she was formidable. A story of resilience, duty, courage under fire. A reminder that even when the world burns, a single ship, crewed by ordinary men, can stand unbroken in the storm of war. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.